welcome back to Acceptable Worship. Grab your Bible and turn to Genesis chapter 46. You know, in this podcast, the past few episodes, we've been looking at the story of Jacob and drawing some lessons about worship through the story of Jacob. Well, here at the end of Jacob's life, we're going to learn another powerful lesson about worship. In the past few chapters of Genesis, we've skipped through the story of Joseph. Remember, Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery. He ends up being the right-hand man of Pharaoh, helping Egypt go through this horrific famine that has ruined and destroyed and ravaged the land of even Jacob and his family. So Joseph's brothers go to Egypt for food, and then they meet Joseph, and Joseph invites them and their father Jacob to come back to Egypt, where they can live safely in the land of Goshen and be helped by Egypt's prosperity. Well, it sounds like a miracle, right? I mean, here's Joseph with the answer. Jacob, family, come move to Egypt. But at the beginning of chapter 46, as Jacob hears that Joseph is alive and is about to head back to Egypt, he has some fear, some anxiety. God, after all, promised him this land. He promised him the land of Canaan, and now he's uprooting and leaving. What about the promise? What about tomorrow? What's going to happen, God, to my land? Well, read with me chapter 46, verses 1 to 4. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt. And I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. If you recall, Jacob is from Beersheba. That's where his father was from. So before Jacob goes to Egypt, to this new land, a fearful and hesitant Jacob goes back to his hometown where it all began, and he offers sacrifices to God. Now, why would Jacob do this? Well, most likely this sacrifice would be what we know from Leviticus to be a sacrifice, a peace offering, or a thanksgiving offering. It's a voluntary offering given to God as a demonstration of gratitude and submission to God's will. Kenneth Matthews, in his commentary, says, Jacob now travels in faith and pauses at the home site of his father to offer his worship of thanksgiving and show his submission to God's will. Jacob's worship is an act of declaration and petition. Back at his old home, Jacob, even though deeply afraid, offers worship of thankfulness. And God again appears to Jacob in a dream, and God speaks to Jacob's fears about going to Egypt. God says, don't worry, Jacob, I'm behind this. Don't worry, I am God. I am going with you to Egypt. Not only will I be with you in Egypt, but I will bring you back to this land. The promise is still good, Jacob. Nothing has changed. Jacob offers a sacrifice before this journey full of question marks. And God rewards Jacob's submission, even amidst great fear, with a promise. I am God. I am going with you. So what does this text teach us about worship? Well, it's in the midst of anxiety over the future, questions about God's purposes, and uneasiness about what's coming next, that we find the presence of the Lord most close. It is in the midst of our anxieties, our sufferings, our fears, that Jesus speaks the most clearly in worship. We see this over and over through the Psalms, and especially the Psalms of Lament. Though the psalmist is afraid and insecure, at the end of the psalm, he always says, "But I will trust the Lord. He is faithful." Listen to Psalm 27, verses 5 and 6. "For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head will be lifted above my enemies all around me. And I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord." As the psalmist is in the day of trouble, he trusts in the Lord. He says, "I will offer sacrifices in the midst of fear and anxiety." We win over worry with worship. When I am anxious over what the doctor will say, what the election will bring, what my children's future will be, or what tomorrow will bring, offering worship to God, coming before Him with song, sacrifice, praise, prayer, reorients my heart to God's purposes. Like Jacob, in that place of worship, God will whisper His promise to you. And He will steady your wayward heart with His word. So, where do you run in anxiety? What do you do when you are afraid? Jacob models how sacrifice can lead to surrender. Let singing be your salve. Let worship cure your worry. Let prayer answer your panic. That's what keeps us centered in God's plan. That's what calms our fears and steadies our heart. That is acceptable worship. We'll see you next time.